Thomas Mitchell had always prided himself on being a fair employer. At 62, he owned a successful construction company and lived in a beautiful two-story house with perfectly manicured gardens in the suburbs of Atlanta. For the past 3 years, Rosa Williams had been his housekeeper, arriving every Tuesday and Friday to clean his home while he was at work. Rosa was a quiet woman in her early 50s, always punctual and thorough in her work. She never asked for anything beyond her agreed payment, never complained about the workload, and kept to herself. Thomas knew very little about her personal life, except that she lived across town and took 2 buses to reach his neighborhood. She was professional, reliable, and seemed content with the arrangement. On this particular Tuesday morning in late October, Thomas had decided to work from home. His office was renovating, and he figured he could catch up on paperwork in the comfort of his study. He had completely forgotten that it was Rosa's cleaning day until he heard the familiar sound of keys jingling at the front door around 9 o'clock. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Rosa called out as she entered, her voice carrying the same respectful tone she always used. She seemed surprised to see him sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop and coffee. "Morning, Rosa. Don't mind me. I'll be working from home today," Thomas replied with a friendly smile, though he could see a slight tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Rosa nodded and began her usual routine, starting with the living room. Thomas tried to focus on his emails, but he found himself occasionally glancing up when he heard her moving furniture or running the vacuum. There was something different about her energy today, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Around 11:30, Thomas decided to take a break and step outside for some fresh air. October in Georgia was beautiful, with the leaves just beginning to change colors. As he opened the back door that led to his garden, he expected to see his usual view of the rose bushes, the small herb garden, and the oak tree that provided shade for most of the yard. What he saw instead made him stop dead in his tracks. Rosa was kneeling in the far corner of his garden, near the area where he grew herbs for cooking. But she wasn't tending to the plants. She was pulling up clumps of grass and putting them into her mouth, chewing slowly and deliberately. Her back was turned to the house, and she seemed completely unaware of his presence. Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. His first instinct was confusion, followed quickly by concern. Was Rosa having some sort of medical episode? Was this normal behavior that he simply didn't understand? He stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to approach her or give her privacy. As he watched, Rosa continued to carefully select certain types of grass and small plants, examining them before eating them. She wasn't behaving erratically or frantically. Her movements were methodical, almost practiced, as if she had done this before. She would chew thoroughly, swallow, and then select another handful. Thomas realized he was witnessing something deeply personal and private. His stomach churned as various possibilities ran through his mind. Was she sick? Was this some kind of cultural practice he wasn't familiar with? Or was there something much more serious going on? He quietly stepped back inside, closing the door as softly as possible. His hands were shaking slightly as he returned to his laptop, but he couldn't concentrate on anything. The image of Rosa eating grass in his garden kept replaying in his mind. He had known her for 3 years, seen her almost every week, and yet he realized he knew almost nothing about her life outside of these walls. For the next hour, Thomas pretended to work while actually worrying about what he had witnessed. He could hear Rosa continuing her cleaning routine inside the house, the same sounds he had grown accustomed to over the years, the vacuum running upstairs, the gentle clink of dishes being washed, the soft footsteps moving from room to room. Everything seemed normal, which somehow made what he had seen in the garden even more unsettling. When Rosa finished cleaning the bathrooms upstairs, she came down to the kitchen to tackle the final area of the house. Thomas looked up from his laptop and studied her face, searching for any signs of distress or illness. She looked the same as always. Neat appearance, calm demeanor, focused on her work. "Rosa," he said hesitantly, "are you feeling all right today? You seem, I don't know, maybe a little tired?" She paused in wiping down the countertops and gave him a small smile. "I'm fine, Mr. Mitchell. Just the usual Tuesday cleaning." I'll be finished in about 20 minutes. Her voice sounded normal, perhaps a bit quieter than usual, but there was nothing in her manner that suggested anything was wrong. This made Thomas even more confused and worried. If she was in some kind of distress, she was hiding it remarkably well. As Rosa finished her work and prepared to leave, Thomas found himself wanting to say something, to ask directly about what he had seen. But the words wouldn't come. How do you ask someone why they were eating grass in your garden? What if he had misunderstood what he saw? What if bringing it up would embarrass her or make her feel violated? Same time Thursday? Rosa asked, gathering her cleaning supplies. Yes, of course, Thomas replied, his voice sounding strained even to his own ears. Rosa, if you ever need anything. I mean, if there's anything I can do to help with anything, please don't hesitate to ask. She gave him a curious look, as if trying to understand the meaning behind his words. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. You're very kind. I'll see you Thursday. After Rosa left, Thomas found himself unable to shake the image from his mind. He spent the rest of the day distracted, barely accomplishing any work. That evening, he found himself standing in his garden, looking at the spot where he had seen her. The grass there did look disturbed, with several bare patches where clumps had been pulled up. As night fell, Thomas realized that Thursday couldn't come soon enough. He needed to understand what was happening, but more importantly, he needed to know if Rosa was in trouble and needed help. The thought that someone he employed, someone he saw regularly, might be suffering in silence, was keeping him awake. Something fundamental had shifted in Thomas's understanding of his relationship with Rosa, and he knew there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance he had lived with for 3 years. Thursday morning arrived with a gray sky that matched Thomas's mood. He had barely slept the night before, his mind racing with questions about Rosa and what he had witnessed. He decided to work from home again, though he wasn't sure he would be able to concentrate any better than he had on Tuesday. When Rosa arrived at her usual time, Thomas noticed immediately that she looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her usually neat appearance seemed slightly disheveled. Her uniform was clean but looked like it had been worn and washed many times, with small signs of wear at the edges. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," she said, but her voice lacked its usual energy. "Morning, Rosa. How are you feeling today?" Thomas asked, watching her face carefully. "I'm well, thank you," she replied, but Thomas could see it was an automatic response rather than an honest one. As Rosa began her work, Thomas found it impossible to focus on anything else. Every few minutes, he would glance toward the window that faced the garden, wondering if she would go outside again. The not knowing was eating at him, but he had decided that if he saw her eating grass again, he would have to say something, regardless of how uncomfortable it might be. Around 10:30, his opportunity came. Through the kitchen window, he saw Rosa walking toward the herb garden. She looked around carefully, as if checking to make sure she wasn't being observed, then knelt down in the same spot as before. This time, Thomas didn't hesitate. He walked quietly to the back door and stepped outside, clearing his throat gently to announce his presence. Rosa immediately stopped what she was doing and turned around, her eyes wide with surprise and what looked like fear. "Rosa," Thomas said softly, walking slowly toward her. "Can we talk for a minute?" She stood up quickly, brushing dirt from her knees, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm sorry. I thought I saw a weed that needed pulling." Thomas could see the panic in her eyes, and his heart went out to her. "Rosa, please don't apologize. I'm not angry. I'm concerned about you. I saw what you were doing on Tuesday, and I see you doing it again today. I just want to understand what's going on." For a long moment, they stood looking at each other across the small garden. Rosa's hands were trembling slightly, and Thomas could see her struggling with whether to tell the truth or maintain the pretense that everything was fine. "Are you sick?" Thomas asked gently. "Is there some medical reason you need to eat plants?" Rosa shook her head slowly, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "No, Mr. Mitchell. I'm not sick." "Then help me understand," Thomas said, taking a step closer. "You've been working for me for 3 years. You're like family to me, Rosa. If something is wrong, I want to help." The word family seemed to break something inside Rosa. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry softly. Thomas felt a lump forming in his throat as he watched this strong, dignified woman break down in front of him. "I'm so ashamed," Rosa whispered through her tears. "I never wanted anyone to know. I've been so careful." "Know what?" Thomas asked, though a terrible suspicion was already forming in his mind. Rosa took a shaky breath and looked up at him. "I've been eating the grass and herbs because sometimes it's all I have. When the money runs out before the next payday, when there's nothing left in the house, I come here, and I know there are things growing that won't hurt me to eat." The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. He felt dizzy, as if the world had tilted sideways. "Rosa, are you telling me that you don't have enough food?" "Not always," she said quickly, as if trying to minimize the severity of the situation. "Most of the time, I manage fine. It's just that sometimes, at the end of the month, or when there are unexpected expenses." "Oh my God," Thomas said, sinking onto the wooden bench beside his herb garden. "Rosa, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ask for help?" Rosa sat down beside him, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "How could I ask? You pay me fairly, Mr. Mitchell. You've never been anything but kind to me. It's not your responsibility to know that I'm terrible with money, or that my grandson got sick and I spent his medication money on groceries, or that my rent went up and I can't make ends meet anymore." As Rosa continued to explain her situation, Thomas felt a growing sense of horror and guilt. She told him about her daughter who had passed away 2 years ago, leaving Rosa to care for her 10-year-old grandson. She explained how her part-time cleaning jobs, including his, barely covered their basic expenses. She described the impossible choices she faced every month between paying rent, buying medicine for her grandson's asthma, or putting food on the table. "The herbs and grass don't taste good," Rosa admitted with a sad smile. "But I looked them up at the library. Most of the plants in your garden are safe to eat, and they have some nutrition. The dandelions are actually pretty healthy. I figured it was better than going hungry, and better than stealing." Thomas felt tears streaming down his own face now. All this time, he had been living in his comfortable house, throwing away leftovers, never giving a second thought to where his next meal would come from. Meanwhile, the woman who cleaned his house, who made his life more comfortable and convenient, had been quietly starving. "Why didn't you ask for an advance on your pay, or for more hours?" he asked. "I was afraid," Rosa said simply. "I was afraid you'd think I was irresponsible or unreliable. I was afraid you'd find someone else who didn't have problems. This job, and the 2 other houses I clean, they're all I have. Without them, my grandson and I would be homeless." Thomas realized that Rosa had been trapped in a situation where her pride and her fear had prevented her from asking for the help she desperately needed. She had chosen to suffer in silence rather than risk losing the little stability she had. "How long has this been going on?" Thomas asked. "About 6 months," Rosa replied. "It started after my daughter died, and I had to take over all her expenses for my grandson. The first time I ate grass from your garden, I felt so guilty. I almost quit. But then I realized that if I quit, things would only get worse." Thomas stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth across the small garden. His mind was racing, trying to process everything Rosa had told him, and figure out what he could do to help. The idea that someone in his employ had been eating grass out of desperation while he lived in luxury was almost too much to bear. "Rosa," he said, stopping in front of her. "This ends today. This ends right now." Thomas immediately led Rosa inside his house and straight to the kitchen. Without saying a word, he opened his refrigerator and began pulling out food. Leftover roast chicken, fresh vegetables, fruit, cheese, bread, and containers of soup he had made earlier in the week. "Mr. Mitchell, what are you doing?" Rosa asked, looking confused and overwhelmed. "I'm making you lunch," Thomas said firmly, continuing to gather ingredients. "And then I'm packing food for you to take home to your grandson. And then we're going to figure out how to fix this situation permanently." Rosa started to protest. "Mr. Mitchell, I can't take your food. I didn't tell you this to ask for charity. I just wanted to be honest with you." Thomas stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. "Rosa, look at me. Do you see charity in my eyes?" Or do you see a friend who's trying to help another friend? Rosa looked at him for a long moment, seeing something in his expression that made her shoulders relax slightly. I see a very kind man who is being more generous than he should be. Wrong, Thomas said with a gentle smile. You see a man who just realized he's been blind to something happening right under his nose, and who wants to do what's right. As Thomas prepared a large meal for Rosa, he began asking questions about her situation that he should have asked years ago. He learned that her grandson, Marcus, was a bright 10-year-old who loved school but had been missing classes when his asthma medication ran out. He discovered that Rosa walked 4 miles to the bus stop each way because she couldn't afford a car, and that she often gave Marcus her own portion of dinner when food was scarce. How much would it take to get you caught up on your bills? Thomas asked as he set a plate of food in front of Rosa. Mr. Mitchell, I can't ask you for money, Rosa said, though she was clearly struggling with hunger as the smell of the warm food filled the kitchen. You're not asking, I'm offering. Please, eat the food and answer my question. Rosa took a small bite of the chicken, and Thomas saw her close her eyes briefly, as if savoring the taste of a real meal. Maybe $800 would catch up the rent and get Marcus's medicine. But I can work extra hours to earn it. I don't need a handout. Thomas was quiet for a moment, thinking, $800 was less than he spent on dinner out in a month. The fact that such a small amount of money had been standing between Rosa and basic necessities made him feel sick. I have a better idea, Thomas said. What if we adjusted our arrangement? Instead of twice a week, what if you came here every day after school to help with different tasks around the house? I've been thinking about having someone help with cooking, organizing my office, maybe light gardening work. Would you be interested in a full-time position? Rosa looked up from her plate, her eyes wide with surprise. Mr. Mitchell, you don't need a full-time housekeeper. This house is already perfectly clean. You're right, Thomas admitted. But I do need help with other things. I'm getting older, Rosa. I could use assistance with grocery shopping, meal preparation, and organizing my business paperwork. Plus, I've been thinking about starting a vegetable garden. And you obviously know about plants. He paused, then continued more seriously. The truth is, Rosa, I can afford to pay you enough that you and Marcus can live comfortably. The question is whether you'd be comfortable working for me full-time. Tears began flowing down Rosa's face again. But this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than shame. Are you sure? I mean, are you really sure you need that much help? Thomas thought about how to answer honestly. What I need is to know that someone I care about is safe and has enough to eat. What I need is to make sure that a little boy doesn't miss school because his grandmother is choosing between his medicine and groceries. If helping you helps me sleep better at night, then yes, I really need this. Over the next hour, they worked out the details of Rosa's new position. Thomas would pay her a salary that was nearly 3 times what she had been earning from all her cleaning jobs combined. She would work 5 days a week, helping with various household tasks but also having time to be there when Marcus came home from school. There's one more thing, Thomas said as he packed bags of groceries for Rosa to take home. I want to meet Marcus. If he's anything like his grandmother, I think we'll get along just fine. When Rosa finally left that afternoon, she was carrying enough food to last her and Marcus for 2 weeks, a check to cover her back rent and Marcus's medicine, and a contract for her new position that would start the following Monday. But the most important thing she carried was something less tangible, the knowledge that someone saw her as more than just hired help. For the first time in months, she wasn't worried about how she would feed her grandson, or whether they would have a roof over their heads. The following Monday, Rosa arrived for her first day as Thomas's full-time assistant. She brought Marcus with her, as they had arranged, so he could meet Thomas and do his homework in the kitchen while Rosa worked. Marcus was a thin, serious boy who was clearly intelligent but seemed older than his 10 years. Thomas could see the resemblance to Rosa in his careful mannerisms and polite way of speaking. But when Thomas showed him the bookshelves in his study and told him he was welcome to read anything that interested him, Marcus's eyes lit up in a way that reminded Thomas of his own childhood love of learning. Did you really used to build buildings? Marcus asked. looking at the construction awards and photos on Thomas's office walls. "I still do," Thomas replied. "Would you like to see some of the blueprints?" As Thomas showed Marcus drawings of buildings his company was constructing, he realized he was enjoying the boy's questions and enthusiasm. It had been years since he'd had young energy in his house, and he found it surprisingly refreshing. That evening, as Rosa prepared to leave with Marcus, Thomas asked her to wait a moment. "Rosa, I need to tell you something," he said. "When I first saw you in the garden, I was confused and worried. But now I realize that what I witnessed wasn't just someone eating grass out of desperation. What I saw was someone with incredible strength and dignity, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to survive and take care of the person she loves most." He paused, his voice becoming emotional. "The reason I was left in tears wasn't just because you were hungry. It was because I realized how much courage it takes to suffer in silence to protect your pride and your job. It was because I understood that while I was living comfortably, someone extraordinary was quietly struggling just a few feet from my back door." Rosa wiped away a tear. "Mr. Mitchell, you saved our lives. Marcus and I. We were sinking, and you threw us a rope." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You saved yourselves. You never gave up. You never stopped trying to provide for Marcus. And you maintained your dignity even in the hardest circumstances. I just opened my eyes and saw what was right in front of me." 6 months later, Thomas's house had transformed into something that felt like a real home for the first time in years. Rosa's cooking filled the kitchen with wonderful smells. Marcus's laughter echoed through the halls when he played in the garden after school, and the three of them had settled into a routine that felt natural and comfortable. Marcus's grades had improved dramatically once his attendance became regular, and his asthma was properly managed. He had developed a fascination with architecture and engineering, spending hours looking at Thomas's construction plans and asking endless questions about how buildings were designed and built. Rosa had gained weight and looked healthier than Thomas had ever seen her. The constant worry that had lined her face was gone, replaced by a calm confidence that came from knowing she could provide for herself and her grandson. For Thomas, the biggest change was the realization that helping Rosa and Marcus had filled a loneliness in his life that he hadn't even realized existed. His house felt alive again, full of purpose and connection. One evening, as they sat together after dinner watching Marcus work on a school project, Rosa turned to Thomas. "I never properly thanked you for seeing me," she said quietly. "Seeing you?" Thomas asked. "All those years. I was just the invisible woman who cleaned your house. But that day in the garden, you didn't just see someone eating grass. You saw a person who needed help. You saw past the shame and the pride to the truth underneath. That's a gift, Mr. Mitchell. Not everyone knows how to really see other people." Thomas thought about her words long after Rosa and Marcus had gone to bed in the small apartment he had helped Rosa rent in his neighborhood. She was right that he had learned to see more clearly. But what she didn't understand was how much she had taught him about strength, dignity, and the quiet heroism of everyday survival. The grass in his garden had grown back completely. But Thomas never looked at that corner of his yard without remembering the day that changed everything. It served as a daily reminder that the most important things in life often happen quietly, and that sometimes the greatest act of kindness is simply paying attention to the people around you with an open heart and willing hands.